G'day, I'm Toby, and I'm going to explain the basics of GeoGen. I do want to preface before getting into it. I am recording this one day before the public release of GeoGen, so there may be differences in future releases if you're watching this a decent bit after this has been uploaded. But on the other side, I'm going to be releasing it when the public release comes out, so setting a timestamp, I guess, thing, so it releases that day. But there may be an update coming with that day, I'm not too sure. So just to want to preface that if there's any changes, I guess in tomorrow's build, if there's a build tomorrow, when it does release, I might update this video. Otherwise, if it all fits, yeah, this should hopefully be fine. So I just want to walk through the basics of GeoGen in this video and get you accustomed to what's going on. So, first off, I'll explain the UI. So, if you've used other Django effects software such as EmberGen or in the future potentially LiquidGen and so forth, whatever they release in the future, you may already be accustomed to the UI. But if not, here is our I guess our 3D view of showing us what the result of our node setup is. So here we can, I have it set to, in the settings, I'll preface this, I think preferences, and in camera, I have it set to industry compatible, but it will start off in default, which I prefer this, but regardless, you can pan around the object, you can look around, so this is the default setup. Nothing too fancy with this. So here you can see effectively what you've created, or whatever's default. Now here we can switch to the 2D view, where when we select and view a node, we can see what each of them are doing. So here is the height map of the base mesh, or the base node I should say, and you can see what's being applied. So here the red is being, I guess, affected, the white is not being affected, and then all this stuff here is like fully just not being touched at all. So these are pretty helpful for seeing exactly what on the I guess the mask is actually doing to the thing, but I generally prefer viewing these here, which I will go into more detail later. So there's that. Up top we've got default. Here you can select which camera you're looking through, so I could change cameras, for example. I'm not sure how usable it is in this version. There we go. So we can change the cameras here, and set it here, and just leave it there, which means we can look around, and when we're ready, we can always go back to it if we find a good spot that we would like to look at, but we won't worry about that now. Next we have the view, and here you can change a bunch of stuff. Anything you need, turn off camera gizmos and whatnot, manipulator. So if you're taking a screenshot, you can leave that. Now, as you'll see here, we have statistics here, which I like leaving on, and you may like leaving it on, as it provides a lot of information into how performant it's running and if you can improve it. So that can be turned on at the bottom, either doing Shift S or just toggling it. That's pretty helpful. Moving along, we also have a fly mode, which allows you to press W, ASD, E and Q to go up and down, and then you can drag, and this allows you to have potentially a bit better control of looking exactly at a specific portion of your scene. I personally don't use that too much, but maybe that comes in helpful for you. Next up, we're going to go over ray marching and so forth, the qualities. So here you'll see two tabs of quality and rendering. Now, these are pretty important as it's different methods of rendering the scene, as well as how much information, I guess, you want put into it. So here we can start off basic with ray marching, and you can set it to low. This will not look very good, but it's going to be extremely performant, as you can see. Bumping it up to ultra will bring it up, which isn't too noticeable now, but on high detail environments and terrains and so forth, that will be a major difference. As well as having So ray marching, which we're currently rendering at 2.5 ms, which is nice. We can bump it up to light mapping, which is a lot, there's quite the big jump. And then you've lastly got path tracing, which is the biggest jump. Path tracing will give you the best result, as generally will, so that's path tracing and calculating all the light bouncing and everything, which is overall the best result you're going to get, but it's also the most performant, or the least performant I should say, so generally only use that when you want to see the best look at your terrain, and maybe when you're trying to take screenshots or something like that, or maybe in the future they allow you to take full-on render the terrain, and when that comes through, maybe that's going to be even more helpful as well. So moving along, we're next going to have the resolutions. So you've got the sizing and resolution of your terrains here. So for example, at the top part, we've got the how many meters are calculated per pixel, really. So 2 meters per pixel. This is maybe, I think, 512p. Correct me if I'm wrong. With 1 meter being 1024. Yep, oh, here we go, it says up the top, 248, and so forth. So this can go up to, I believe, 16 by 16. I'm not sure if this is going to run. It will run at the moment. It's very experimental, and I would not recommend it, as I'm currently using 19 out of my 16 available gigabytes, which is lucky that it does go off onto your RAM when it's overloaded, but still, it will run significantly worse. So here, for my general stuff, I like working. You want to generally work, I think, in lower resolutions and slowly build up as you start adding more detail, as that's going to give you the best performance, while also, you know, it runs smooth, while also overall just working nice. Is if you're constantly, once you're starting to get like 10, 20, even 30 nodes in the setup, running it constantly at 4K or 8K is just going to put a lot of it's not going to run well. Sometimes once you start adding a lot, especially a lot of filters, you'll start taking maybe 15 minutes just to, you know, cache everything and whatnot. So there's that. Here we've got sizing, and this is the size of it all. This changes just the size of the terrain. So this is, you know, 500 meters, 256 meters, going up to 8K, and that's where you can start getting really massive terrains coming out. Once again, this is all just the basic default terrain, and, you know, depending on how you make your terrain, sometimes you may want to change that, sometimes you may not want to. Lastly, we have this this is not going to make any difference for this sort of stuff, but when you start messing around with planets, this is where you're going to change the sizing, or I believe it's just the quality of the planets. I don't think planets at the moment have sizing, and even then it's not really visible. I believe they did have that, but it didn't do anything, so they removed the feature and now have this. Lastly, we've also got this. So you can minimize, or not minimize, but make it smaller, make it bigger. Do be warned, as you can see here, at 3.5 ms, going down to 1.5 to 2. It does do, you know, there is an impact on your performance, so generally, if it's running bad, you can almost run it as small as possible and it'll give you the best performance, but not as visible really. So, you know, make sure, you know, if you're on a 4K monitor, it may not be the best option, unless you're wanting to take really high quality pictures or you're wanting to see those really small details. So sticking around the middle is generally fine. Okay, so next up we're going to be talking about nodes. So here is your nodes graph. Underneath this we have the node detail graph. So this is going to show you your parameters when we select a specific node. Anyone, it will change. And yeah, so here you can change all the important features of your node. So for example, we are going to select this base node. And here we can change a lot of interesting features about how the noise I guess types work and how it's being applied to the terrain. So here we can change it all, and you can see it all in real time changing, which is really awesome. So I'll just play with this for a bit so you can see some of the controls that we have. So this is a scale. Here you can make some awesome mountains, and there's some awesome crevasses in here. So here's the warp amplitude. So this is how much this warp noise is going to be affecting it, I believe. So if we only want a little bit of effectiveness, we can do this, and that just breaks it up a little bit. Otherwise, you know, you can go, oops, wrong control. You can change it here to fully, and that's completely. And as you'll see, this is going to change it up. So here we can change up the warp scale, for example, and then bring down the warp amplitude, and it keeps the shape, of course, but sometimes we only want small bumps and hills going on. So here in the base, we can scroll down, and we have different types of bases for the node. So this is different styles, and it gives you a basis to work with, and overall can push you towards your desired result quicker. So here we start with mountain ridges. This is pretty self-explanatory. It's going to give you nice mountain ridges, which you can obviously improve and fine-tune later, and you've got controls over how it'll, you know, is affected with different seeds and so forth, and the details and everything, and you can change how I guess the amount of effect it has. So here we can change it to base, for example, which is pretty similar. Cliffs, which gives you awesome cliffs, and this is pretty good for canyons and so forth. Changing the amount of chaos and the scale of the chaos and the width and so forth will give you some more different results, of course. Crevasses, and I love this one. This is great for canyons. Islands, which is pretty good when mixed with water, and you can decrease the water, and that will give you an awesome result, which I'll go over the water later on. Back again with the mountain ridge and the undulations. I'm not sure if that's pronounced correctly. This is quite a unique base, but it's pretty helpful for some small differences, maybe for some rocks or some abstract designs. Moving onwards, we have the warp, which I mentioned before, can change how it all works. Now, you're not required a warp noise at all, and you can also give a bit of warp in here, just default stuff. Now, once again, the warp amplitude won't do anything, as I mentioned, as it requires a warp noise plugged in, but you can change a little bit of stuff here, which will give you some results there. But once again, plugging your warp noise in, you've got a lot of controls in here with different noise types. So Voronoi, Perlin, Cubist. Got some awesome designs here. Next we have Master Occlusion. Now these are only the default things, but I will run you through these. The Master Occlusion is determining, well, it gets the occlusion of the map, and then it will change where the colorizer is being impacted. So with the darker parts, whether it's really occluded is here, and then with the top light parts are generally at the peaks. So master occlusion, there's a bunch of different masters we have here, and these can change it also. For example, a curvature, you can plug in the height map, then plug in the gradient mask, and it gives you a completely different result. Here we can, you know, play around with it. Do we want smaller details, or do we want larger details here? Playing around with that can give you some awesome results. I'll delete that though. So here with the remap, it changes how much it's effectively getting affected by each area. So with one side of the gradient being white and the other side being a maroony color, you can play around and give it more maroon color or more white. Moving along, we've got colorize, and once again, you've got the different colors here, with the white being on one side and then the maroon being on the other side, but you can change this to be whatever you want. So we can give it a green, and for example, just double clicking this will give you a selector, and we can give it a cool blue. It's a cool alien-like planet, terrain I should say. Now moving with this, you can change the remask, and that once again does a pretty similar thing to what the remap here does, where it will give it a bit more influence on each side depending on where you move it. I should preface first, you have different styles here with a single color, if you would rather a single color. Now, this generally isn't going to be something that you will want to use. Generally, to get more high detail terrains, you'll want multiple. So going generally with color gradient. But if you're just wanting to colorize a specific portion, as you've masked it out with, for example, the mask, and you just want this to be a specific color, here you can choose, for example, this, and then if we set a base color over here, you can change it. So if we set a color gradient once again, and then go with maybe a green, and then a blue over here, the gradient mask over here with a, for example, curvature, shove in the height map. It's a bit of a weird look, but regardless, that shows off how it works. So maybe you only want a small portion of it to be a specific color, then that's where the single color colorized mode would be helpful. If I Control Z this, we'll unplug that. So getting a bit more into that, the mask over here is just masking, so that's a specific part. So only these red parts here, which I'll go into detail what I just did, but only these parts are going to have color, and the rest of it will be whatever your base color is. Now, as you can see, this is black, and because black is the default. Now going into, we need a base color if we want it to have some other colors here. So if we go colorize, we can change this to be white, for example, and that's where you're going to be able to change where the black is. So if you got random blacks there that you didn't specify, that could be because you've masked out regions and have regions that don't have any base color. So make sure you always have a base color of any form, unless you like, you know, the dark black color. Now here we have the gradient mask. This is only useful if it's a gradient. So putting back on the gradient over here, you can see it being applied, and that's where that becomes helpful. So both the mask and the gradient are controlled using, by right-clicking, you'll bring this little selector up. You can search for different nodes, but I generally find it easier to go through manually and find which works for me. You will find different masks. So we have cavity, or the occlusion that's currently being used for the default, curvature, cavity, mask height, noise, mask shape, slope, orientation, so forth. These have different uses. I would not use, you cannot use planet mask, noise, or weather in these terrains, and these are only really usable when messing around with planets. You also have mask modifiers if you want to change stuff. I find this pretty helpful in some instances, just if you want to detect, for example, edges and whatnot, but overall they're not the most, I don't use them too much for my sorts of things, but maybe they work well in your workflow. So here on the renderer, you can change a bunch of stuff about how the terrain in or planet is viewed. So here you got different controls such as the light and how the light is going to be moved. You can also change this by right-clicking and dragging to move the light source around wherever that light source is. If I bring it down to make it a bit more viewable, I'm not too sure where it currently is, but you can change it around with that, or you've got more control over it here. So if you're just struggling to reach the exact result that you want with holding right mouse button, you can just move it here. Here, of course, you can change the sun color. So maybe you want some cool planet. I'm just going to reset that. You have the sun intensity, ambient color, ambient occlusion, sky intensity, I should say, sorry, penumbra, and sun size. You guys have done a bit of research into, I guess, light sources and how shadows and so forth work. You may know already what some of these do. Next up, we have water, which is not toggled, or as of, when you open everything up, but you can toggle it just by clicking this. Now here, this will add water and give you a bit of controls over this. I do want to preface that at the moment, water is extremely, non-performant, so be careful when you use it, and only use it really as an example of where you want things to be, and I will put most of that work into your DCC program, or however you want to be, well, whatever you use for rendering. As you can see, we go from using not much, rendering, like the delay for rendering goes up a significant amount and can fully kill a lot of your computer. So here we can change the water level, opacity, wave scale, wave amplitude. So wave scale being, you know, how obviously large each wave is going to be. Then the wave amplitude is generally going to give you a more rough look. Think like white caps and that sort of stuff. Got the watercolors. Give you some murky looks, some water absorption. Refractive index, which gives you an awesome look. Underwater god rays, which I don't find too noticeable at the moment, but in future updates it may become more noticeable. Same with caustics, you can see a slight change there, but generally I wouldn't mess around with it too much as it's not going to give you too much of a difference. Water emissive, indirect burst, and troubled water intensity. Turning that off, we're going to move on to depth of field. This is awesome if you want a really close-up look, or you want to hide parts of your terrain here. So let's play around with this. Change the sensor size. We can blur out the foreground and focus more on this portion of the terrain. That's really helpful when making very small terrains or materials that you want to take a small picture for, but generally, due to how you'll generally take pictures of landscapes with them all being very large, you generally, with a camera, wouldn't take a picture with a high depth of field, and the same being said for this. Next up we have fog, which is awesome. You can play around with the density, chaos scale, fog coverage, fog radius, position of it all, the distortion, which spins it around, which is a really cool look, fog height, fog transition, fog color, which can give you some awesome looks, the extinction color, fog eccentricity, the emissive indirect boost, the occlusion. These are all pretty subtle changes. You can constrain it to the terrain, so this is only going to be noticeable with your terrain. I'll just bump up the density so it's more visible. Fog occlusion. I think I mentioned that before. You can get it to follow the terrain as well. I'll turn that off because that also, as you can see, really puts a lot of it, there's a big impact on performance there. Next up we have the atmosphere. This is nice. You can change the planet atmosphere. There's a lot of change into the background, but also will add a bit of like a mist, as is often noticeable when looking at things from far away. So you got the scale, the Rayleigh. Now, I should preface, as some of these other settings are, you're probably not going to need it for most terrain-based stuff. It is pretty noticeable when you start messing around with planets, but for this sort of stuff, it isn't going to be too noticeable unless you want some look dev controls. Next we have details. These aren't too helpful, but if you have normal maps inputted with here, normal details, it's helpful there, but generally I would stick away from this. You have your usual tone mapping, which is similar to what GeoGen has. So you got the Uchimura, Keiji, Reinhardt, Hable, normal ACs, linear, Lottes, so forth. Got the exposure for that as well. Last but not least, we have bloom. This isn't too noticeable, but if we add some emissive, let's see what we can do here. Let's mask that area, so these, I believe it should be these regions. Let's see. Yeah, here we go. get a bit of a missive there. Then bump up the bloom. This should be a bit more noticeable. There we go. Just got to make sure that the threshold's right. Now, this isn't the best example, but if you are messing around a lot more with stuff like the volcanoes, if you've seen any of those made in GeoGen, then it will be a lot more noticeable. Now, on to the last aspect that I want to talk about in regards to the default scene. If you do want to export, you may be wondering, well, how do I export? If we right-click, we can also import stuff here, but we're going to focus on the export part. You can export the height map. So this would involve you dragging into the height map into the height map. And here you can change a bunch of stuff in regards to the file name, where the file is 16-bit, which I would generally use. You can change the snap to, terrain resolution, as well as reduction. You can also export a lot of different stuff, such as the color, the mesh, if you'd rather that, or masks themselves if you want to do a lot of the coloring and texturing in other programs. Next, I'm going to go over some small important features that you may at first not realize, but are quite important and may be the reason why you're running into issues, or will help you find more about said nodes, right, that you're using. So here, as I mentioned and showed before, if you select, it has to be the last one in the line. You can select these, and these will show exactly what is being used. So here we have the height map being shown, the warp, and you can see how the warp's being used, which once again you can go into the 2D mask to see a bit easier over there how that's working. The masks themselves, so you can see it being worked there. The output here, which is different to the beauty, as well as this, you can see the bloom and what's going on there. A common issue that you may run into when doing, for example, masks, you may add a mask, and let's add, for example, curvature, and we'll mask it over here. We have, why is it not working? We just have a default. What's going on here? The issue that we're running into is we need to input the height map. That's a common, issue that you may run into. So just make sure you always have your height maps plugged in, as it won't be usable. Now this is pretty helpful, as for example, if we want to go, for example, I don't know, let's add let's go add terracing, right? So if we want to work on some terracing, we can look here, and this is what the result of the terracing is going to look like, and here's what the result of the base map looks like. This means you don't have to unplug things, or on the vice versa side of things, you can see what's happening without having it plugged in once again. So we can start working here and adding some rocks, for example. See the rocks being implemented as well. If we move down the scale of the rocks, here we can see it's not plugged in. When we deselect it, it's still the same original result. But as soon as we plug these in, you can see the result being changed. Now, going back to, I guess, the basics, there's one last thing that I really want to talk about before just showing off some creations that can be made. Here, you've got a heap of different nodes here. Now, this may be a bit overwhelming at the start, and once you start looking into a lot of the default presets that come with the program, you may be a bit overwhelmed. But you really just want to break down what each thing does. Just play around with what, each node, individually does in its use cases. So, for example, micro craters, we can plug these in, have a look at what that does, and it adds some micro craters. That's design, and you can play around with each parameter and see how it affects the terrain. Some do take a massive performance impact compared to other ones, and I will preface this. A lot of the filters use a very large, there's a massive performance hit with these, where shoving in something like, for example, thermal erosion, we'll go from around 3 ms, and if we run that, it will add a very big impact once we start bringing up the resolution. As you can see, when caching it, it's going to take longer and longer. Now, these are all instantaneous, but as you can see, this starts taking a while. And then bring it up to 16K. Well, let's just say my computer crashed. So, that was unfortunate, but maybe don't do 16K. It's very experimental at the moment, and as you can see with filters, it's not really great. It is doable with the base terrain, but unless you have, you know, maybe a really large GPU, like with lots of VRAM. Now I have a 4080 myself, but maybe you would want something like 120 plus gigabytes of RAM. As I'm only on 32 gigabytes, and that's a bit of a restriction here. Okay, so I just want to show off some of my, I guess, presets that I have made personally. I'm not sure if they'll come up here. No, not all of them will. But I just want to show off and walk you through some stuff that I might talk about some of these. I plan to do some videos explaining, I guess, breaking down how I made some stuff and potentially doing walkthroughs on how I made them. Just to give you guys an idea of how to make some more detailed and some pretty cool looking stuff. Now, I do want to preface, I'm not the world's greatest, you know, guy when it comes to terrain. I'm only a hobbyist, so I hope that this is helpful, but maybe there might be better people who are more, have a bit more knowledge, and they might be able to provide better knowledge, but from a hobbyist, this will be a very broken down, easy to explain point of view in that case, because, you know, I don't know a lot of those more detailed things. So, breaking down, I'm going to open up my first project, so I'll quickly bring that up. Yeah, so the first project I want to show off is a canyon that I made. Now, this is an extremely basic one that I've broken down and I'll probably go over. There's a couple nodes, but as you can see, I've broken it down to pretty simple, I guess, methods. And I do just want to preface, so a lot of this is just the default canyon. I've made a couple changes, of course. You can see all these ones with, I guess, reload. Symbols are parameters that have been changed, excluding the position, as that always, you know, no matter what happens there, it doesn't change. But a lot of this is pretty simple. And just going into it, I mean, we have, like, you know, terracing that I've added, which you can see these changes here, with warps going into the faulting to change it up and break up the floor of it all, as you can see here. Default with some faulting that breaks it up, with some sediment going on. That gives it a bit of some, like, sandy, dusty look. Some erosion, which breaks up the edges. I added a masked noise to change up where the rocks are going to be displaced, and then once again we added some rocks here, so it's not too noticeable, it's pretty subtle, but as you can see down here we've got some rocks, so turning it off and turning it back on again, there's some rocks. Now these are not perfect as they are height maps, so you'll see some black marks which aren't overly desirable, but that's one of those things with the alpha software, really. And yeah, moving along, we've got some stuff in the base color, for example. We get some nice base color. Now, these are all color picked, as you can color pick with other software. I mean, we can change it, and I'll do something off my off screen. Yeah, I'm on Steam, and I'll just go over some logos here, and we can change the colors to some cool looking color schemes here, and, you know, playing around with the color mask will give you some cool results. Anyway, control zooming that, we can move along to the height mask, which just gets rid of some portions of it, and there we go, we can give it a little. I don't believe that's really doing anything. There we go, I must have accidentally unplugged it. Here this darkens the top, just as I wanted it to be a little bit darker. It's a small change with a single color node, you don't need that. Curvature, getting some cracks, some stuff, some extra detail going on. As you can see, just breaking up the overall color here. Here I added a bit more going on with the top, so some cool patterns going on, and this is just with a bunch of stuff, you know, playing around with propagation to make sure it only selects the top, you know, masking the propagation where I want it to actually be, and then adding a bit of extra fancy warps to it to change up how the gradient is used, and that's that. And then lastly, I did a color adjust just to lighten it up and, just touch up a couple things. And last but not least, it looks like this finalized, which I think is a pretty cool result. Now, there's only a 2K resolution, but, bumping up the resolution can give even more detailed and cool looks, and it looks quite nice. Moving along, we'll move to my snowy mountains. Wait for it to load, and now at 2K it's not anything too impressive. I think 2K is fine for something here. I'd generally rather 4K for something like this, as I'm currently using a splatter node, I believe, to generate trees and stuff. So, I don't know, maybe, I believe there's this node in Gaia called Arboreal, or something along those lines, which is great for generating trees. Now, as you can see here, with nodes that take a while, make sure that you always select in the program, because when I select out, as you'll see, after a bit of time, it will just drop off. There we go. It drops off. So make sure you always got your cursor in if you want the most performance out of it. Now, this is only really important for these more detailed terrains, which I might need to break this one down a bit, add some nodes explaining, there's a bit of stuff going on everywhere, but, yeah. Now, as you can see, these filter nodes, especially fluvial erosion. While we wait for this to load, I'll bring up Discord and show off. I have some specific numbers, if I can see if I can find them again. I did a bit of research into some base terrains, I believe, and the filter performances, which I'll just bring up. Here we go. You may want to pause this, but here I have some stuff talking about filters and the performances. So here we got, on the base with my display, it uses 15.4 gigabytes. When I add a water node, it goes to 9.4 gigabytes, crease is 8.64, crumble 8.56, so forth. You can pause and read this. The big thing to note is the fluvial erosion takes the longest to load. Now, you'll notice that if you add something on top of each other without reloading, it will just keep increasing the VRAM performance at the current point in time. So make sure you're reloading the page if you want to do testing as well. Not reload the page, reload the project, I should say. Now, this one's still taking a bit because, to put an example, I was, not looking exactly at it. So after this fluvial erosion, it shouldn't be too bad. There we go. Snow shouldn't be too bad either. There we go. Here we can see the trees coming up. So this still isn't perfect. I believe when I took an actual render of this, it was all in 8K and whatnot. But here we can see a pretty cool result. Now, getting very high detail parts like this is pretty hard to get, especially 4K being, I believe, the minimum I would probably go. But if I bring up, for example, a close-up I took of it. Now this is with 8K, as I mentioned, and you can see you get some quite pointy, sharp tips here of some trees. Now, you can export this probably as a mask and overlay some trees here, but this works plenty fine as a look div result. But it's perfectly fine for quite a decent distance, as they're a lot more noticeable than, general 2K. Some nice results here. That is pretty simple. I probably won't go over this one, but I will explain how to make it in a future video. Now, moving along, I might bring up some more interesting things, So, here I'm just going to go through my files and bring up, for example, this was the first thing I really ever put time into, and it was an asteroid, and it's pretty simple. As you can see, we got the depth of field going on, so I might just turn that off. So here we got a nice depth of field, not nice depth of field, a nice asteroid going on, and we might increase the resolution to 2K. Pretty basic. It's very simple. It's just a warp noise. Adding some craters, and then playing around with some color schemes going on, so here we go. And you can get some pretty detailed stuff. If I don't save that, and go out. Let's see. I quite like my Jupiter-like planet. So this one I color switch. It's very basic. You can get some awesome looks. So if I show it up to 8K, get an awesome looking planet here. very high detailed. Some nice views. And play around with the colorize, and this can give you, you know, change for everything is being colored. So we got some cool things. Now I believe I color swatched Jupiter, specific picture of a close-up of some fancy colors going on there. Now it's not entirely realistic, it's not entirely what Jupiter looks like, but I quite like the look of it. So, you know, I think if you think something looks cool, I think that's probably more important than it necessarily being exactly spot on, you know? If something being spot on isn't necessarily going to look cool in the first place, albeit it generally does. Now moving on to, so those were some planets that you can make. I believe I've made some other interesting planets. Not too sure what weird planet is. This is me just playing around. Going into some materials. So one interesting thing that you can do is you can make materials. Yeah, that's right. Substance designer. So that's pretty cool. If I open, for example, I first started off with stones, so I'll show off stones, and this was me playing around, and I managed to make some nice like stone path kind of thing. We can remove this little lump here, for example. Let's reduce this. I guess that you can increase the scale of fully decrease, so that changes really a lot of the noise as well, which is why it's acting a bit weird. It gives you a nice path, and that's pretty cool. But going into some more, you know, niche designs, we can start looking at stuff like, for example, Lego, right? This was pretty simple. Now, the next material I'll show, it was really, I guess, the idea behind this. But, you know, we got a pretty simple scene where it's just really a splatter node, getting some bumps up here, like a Lego block, and really just getting a texture map. Just turned a Lego, you know, the Lego logo, turned it into a height map in Photoshop, right? Then just displayed it. Just displaced it on top of these, I guess, cylinders here. And that gives you the cool look. You can change the colors and everything. Turn off the depth of field here. Turn that off, and you can play around with the color. Get some nice looking blocks here. Some orange, some red, some pink, some blue. It's pretty cool. Now, this is probably one of my more favorite projects that I've worked on that I'm about to show you. I'd been watching one of the prior live streams that GeoGen had done, and I saw that they made some, you know, some walkway bumps, and, you know, that really inspired me to see if I could recreate it as, you know, this wasn't included as a preset, and I was like, why didn't they include this? So I decided, let's see if I can make it, and I think I did a pretty good job. I think there's things that I would definitely potentially fix and change about it, but it's quite detailed. I would like to break this down. I probably wouldn't remake it. Maybe might. I don't know. In a future video. But this is really just a simple design of just making the parts, just breaking it down. You know, I got a little bit of bevel going on and just splicing it and then adding some small details really. Just breaking it up is really important here, as you can see. Add some erosion and whatnot. Get some fancy colors going on. Just you know, applying a heap of different things, you know, to make sure that it all works out pretty good, and just masking everything. One last thing that I just quickly wanted to mention, I forgot to mention this, on the Discord, if you guys are in the GeoGen Discord, I also have uploaded a lot of my preset files in there, so if you want to break down some things that I've done, a lot of them have been, you know, explained, sort of like grouped as some of these have been shown. So if you want to see some of those sorts of files, download some of my presets there. I don't believe all of them are on there, but there's a pretty good amount of really basic ones on there, so that I've uploaded. So, you know, if you see some of these and like, well, that's cool, you know, and maybe I'll do some breakdowns later, but if you just want to, you know, play around and test them, and assuming it all works with the version that comes out, you know, when it comes out, if it does, yeah, I would recommend checking those out as well, just to see how things are done. But some of them are more complex. This one's fairly complex. It's basic, you know, it's pretty basic in some instances, but it also kind of complex in other instances. So, yeah, it depends on what you're after, but maybe that might be helpful. But yeah, I think that's about all I want to talk about, all I want to really bring up. GeoGen is incredibly interesting. I find it quite, albeit it's quite similar to a lot of terrain softwares, I overall find it also quite different at the same time. And I guess, yeah, I mean, you're probably watching this either because A, you're interested in GeoGen, or B, because you own GeoGen and, you're trying to learn. And overall, I just think that it's pretty cool. Pretty different, and I think it's worthwhile having, especially if you have, the Django Fix suite. And it's just awesome to check around. Now, I do think that at the moment, in regards to terrains, it's not as, I guess, you can't create as detailed, I don't think, terrains, or I haven't seen any results, when it comes to just, in program stuff yet, but it is just an alpha at the moment, especially, this is the this is before, this is, the private release right now, so, yeah, I believe in the next maybe year or so, it's going to become quite the contender for other programs such as World Creator, World Machine, Gaia, and TerraGen, and those sorts of other things. Now, at the moment, planets aren't a thing in other terrain programs, so it's really awesome, because at the moment, I believe really Blender and Houdini are probably the only two programs that I really know that can make it, outside of maybe like ZBrush manually, doing stuff and whatnot. So that's pretty awesome. As well as materials. I haven't really seen too many materials in a lot of those other programs. I've seen some in Gaia, but not so much in World Creator and all those other ones. So pretty interesting. It's also, that's why I think it is worthwhile having, and investing into, as at the moment it's not necessarily the best at anything, but it can do a lot, and it's only going to get better with time, as opposed to some that are completely perfected its specific role, but you would only buy it for that specific role, and that might necessarily not suit your needs as well as maybe this would. If you want to do, some close-up shots as well as some far planet shots, in space, then it's going to be perfect for what you're looking for, whereas some other ones might not be. So, overall, I believe it to be worth it. I believe you guys should all try it, and I think it's really awesome software, and I totally enjoy using it. It's just a blast. So, yeah, thank you guys all for watching. Hope it's been informative. Hopefully, this is all a good video, and you, from here out, know how to use the software. Yeah, have a good one. Thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you next time. See you.